The sound of the gavel struck fear into Delilah Morgan's heart as she stood on the auction block, tears streaming down her dust-stained cheeks. It was 1875 in the unforgiving territory of Arizona, and at 22 years old, she never imagined she would be sold like cattle after the stagecoach robbery that had left her penniless and alone. $500 for the woman. The auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the crowd gathered in the small frontier town of Copper Creek. A fine worker with good breeding years ahead of her, Delilah flinched at the degrading description. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been traveling west to start a new life as a schoolteacher after losing her parents to influenza back east. Now, through a cruel twist of fate and frontier justice, she was being auctioned to pay for her supposed debts to the town after being robbed of everything she owned. $600, called a rough voice from the crowd. Delilah recognized him as the owner of the saloon, a man with wandering hands and cruel eyes who had made his intentions clear when she'd been brought into town. $700, shouted another. Delilah's legs trembled beneath her threadbare dress. Her wrists were bound before her with coarse rope that bit into her skin. The noonday sun beat down mercilessly, making her light-headed as the bidding continued. $800, the saloon owner again, his grin revealing tobacco-stained teeth, the crowd murmured. It was an exorbitant sum for a woman with no particular skills beyond her education, which held little value on the frontier. Going once, the auctioneer called. Delilah closed her eyes, unable to look at the faces of men bidding for ownership of her life and body. Going twice. $1,000. A hush fell over the crowd. The new voice was deep, steady, and commanding. Delilah's eyes flew open to locate its source. A tall man stood at the back of the crowd, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Unlike the others, he didn't leer or grin. He stood perfectly still, one hand resting on his gun belt, the other holding a small leather pouch that Delilah presumed contained the bid amount. $1,000 from Mr. Preston Hayes, the auctioneer announced, surprised at the high bid. Going once, going twice, sold. The crowd parted as the stranger approached the auction block. Up close, Delilah could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps no more than 30. His face was tanned and weathered from the sun, with a strong jaw dusted with stubble. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, met hers without wavering. Without a word, he handed the leather pouch to the auctioneer, who quickly counted the money. Then, to Delilah's surprise, the man named Preston climbed the steps to the platform and pulled a knife from his belt. She flinched, stepping back in fear, but he reached for her bound wrists instead. With one quick motion, he sliced through the ropes. "No one owns you now," he said quietly, so only she could hear. Confusion clouded Delilah's mind. "But I just made sure no one else could buy you," he interrupted, his voice low. "You're free to go wherever you wish." The crowd began to murmur in disapproval. The sheriff stepped forward. "Now see here, Hayes, you bought her fair and square." "The debt is paid," Preston finished firmly, "and now she's free." He turned back to Delilah. "Miss, I have a proposition for you, but I won't force you into anything. Would you hear me out somewhere less public?" Delilah glanced around at the hostile faces in the crowd, particularly the saloon owner who looked ready to challenge the outcome. Whatever this stranger's proposition might be, it had to be better than the alternatives. "Yes," she whispered, rubbing her chafed wrists. "Please." Preston nodded once, then turned to face the crowd. "The lady will be coming with me. Anyone who has a problem with that can speak to me directly." His hand rested casually on his holstered revolver, and something in his stance made the crowd step back. He offered his arm to Delilah, who hesitated only a moment before taking it. He led her down the steps and through the parting crowd. No one dared to stop them. They walked in silence down the dusty main street. Delilah was acutely aware of the stares following them, but Preston seemed unconcerned, his stride purposeful. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "The hotel," he replied. "You need a safe place to rest and think about what you want to do next." "The hotel," alarm crept into her voice. Preston stopped walking and turned to face her. Miss, I meant what I said. No one owns you. I'll pay for a room for you, your own room and a meal. After that, if you want to leave Copper Creek, I'll help you do that safely. If you want to stay, I might have work to offer, but that's your choice to make. Delilah studied his face, looking for deception, but found none. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. A shadow passed over his features. Let's just say I've seen what happens to people who are treated as property. It isn't right. They continued to the hotel, a two-story building that was the finest establishment in the small town, which wasn't saying much. The lobby was sparsely furnished but clean, with a desk attended by an elderly man who eyed Delilah with undisguised curiosity. 2 rooms, Mr. Finch, Preston said, placing coins on the counter. 2, the clerk raised his eyebrows. We've only got the one available at the moment, Mr. Hayes. Preston frowned. Is that so? Cattle buyers came through yesterday, filled us right up. Delilah tensed, wondering if this was where the man's true intentions would be revealed. Preston turned to her. Miss, I can find other accommodations for myself. You take the room. Relief flooded through her. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, Preston, he corrected gently. And you are Delilah Morgan, Miss Morgan, he nodded. Mr. Finch, please have a hot bath sent up for Miss Morgan and a meal from the restaurant next door. That'll be extra, the clerk said. Preston placed more coins on the counter without comment, then turned back to Delilah. I have some business to attend to. Will you be all right here for a few hours? Delilah nodded, still somewhat dazed by the rapid turn of events. Good. I'll return before sundown and we can discuss your options then. He tipped his hat to her and left the hotel. Mr. Finch handed Delilah a key. Room 4, top of the stairs. Thank you, she said, taking the key with trembling fingers. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Delilah sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. Tears sprang to her eyes again, but this time from relief rather than despair. A knock at the door announced the arrival of the bath, brought up by 2 young boys carrying a copper tub between them. They were followed by several more trips of hot water. Once they left, Delilah stripped off her filthy dress and sank into the bath, scrubbing away the grime and humiliation of the auction block. As promised, a meal arrived, a hearty stew with fresh bread that Delilah devoured, realizing she hadn't eaten properly in days. After eating, exhaustion overtook her and she fell into a deep sleep on the bed. She woke to another knock at the door. Dusk had fallen, and for a moment she was disoriented. Then the memories flooded back, and she scrambled to make herself presentable before answering. Preston stood in the hallway, hat in hand. May I come in, Miss Morgan? The dining room is rather crowded, but we could go there if you prefer. Delilah considered. Being alone with this man in her room wasn't proper, but then again, nothing about her situation was proper. And after what he had done for her, she found she trusted him more than she would trust the prying eyes of the townsfolk. You may come in, Mr. Hayes Preston, she said, stepping aside. He entered, keeping a respectful distance. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. He was handsome in a rugged way, with those startling blue eyes set in a face that had seen its share of hardship. I hope you were able to rest, he said, taking the room's only chair when she gestured to it. Yes, thank you. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed. I don't know how to repay your kindness. There's no need. He placed his hat on his knee. I meant what I said earlier. You're free to go wherever you wish, but if you have nowhere to go, I have a proposition. What sort of proposition? She asked cautiously. I own a ranch about a day's ride from here, he explained. It's not much, but it's growing. I've been looking for someone to help with the household and to teach my younger brother. He's 12 and too clever for his own good, but with no formal education. Delilah's heart lifted. You're offering me a position as a governess and housekeeper if you're willing. The pay wouldn't be much at first, but you'd have room and board and you'd be safe. He looked at her earnestly. My brother and I are the only ones living at the main house. There are a few ranch hands who have their own quarters. It sounded too good to be true. Why would you do this for a stranger? Preston was quiet for a moment. I saw you on that auction block and you reminded me of someone who didn't get the chance you're getting now. There was a story there, Delilah was certain, but she didn't press. I was traveling west to take a teaching position when the stagecoach was robbed. I lost everything, my money, my belongings, even the letter offering me the position. Where was the position? A town called Willow Creek, about 100 miles west of here. Preston nodded. I know it. Small place, but growing. The sheriff here said I had to pay for my room and board while they investigated the robbery when I couldn't pay. She trailed off, the humiliation of it still fresh. That sheriff has been running that scheme for years, Preston said, his jaw tightening. He works with the road agents, I suspect. They rob the coach, he detains the passengers for their protection, then auctions off those who can't pay their debts to the town. That's horrible, Delilah whispered. It is, and it's why I was at that auction today. I've been trying to gather evidence against him. Preston leaned forward. Miss Morgan, you don't have to accept my offer. If you prefer, I can take you to Willow Creek. Perhaps your position is still available. Delilah considered this. I doubt it. It's been 2 weeks and they were expecting me. She took a deep breath. I would like to accept your offer, Mr. Hayes, at least until I can save enough to move on, if that's acceptable to you. Relief crossed his face. More than acceptable. We can leave at first light tomorrow if you're ready. I have nothing to pack, she said with a sad smile. We'll remedy that. He stood. There's a general store that should still be open. We can get you some essentials before we leave. I can't let you spend more money on me. Consider it an advance on your wages. His tone brooked no argument. It's a long ride to the ranch and you'll need proper clothing. Delilah reluctantly agreed and they ventured out to the general store. The proprietor's wife helped her select 2 simple dresses, undergarments, a warm shawl, and sturdy boots. Preston added a wide-brimmed hat to protect her fair skin from the sun and a heavy coat for the colder nights. When they returned to the hotel, Preston handed her the packages. Get some rest, Miss Morgan. I'll meet you in the lobby at sunrise. Thank you, she said, meaning it more deeply than the simple words could convey. He tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Morgan. As promised, Preston was waiting in the lobby when Delilah came down the stairs at dawn, dressed in one of her new dresses, a deep blue calico that brought out the rich brown of her eyes. He stood when he saw her, and something flickered in his gaze that made her heart beat a little faster. Good morning, he said. I have breakfast for us at the livery with the horses. They walked through the quiet town, the streets empty save for a few early risers. At the livery, Preston had saddled 2 horses, a sturdy chestnut gelding for himself and a gentle dapple gray mare for Delilah. Do you ride, Miss Morgan? He asked as he secured her new belongings to the saddle. Yes, though it's been some time, she admitted. Daisy here is gentle as they come, he assured her, patting the mare's neck. She'll take good care of you. They ate a simple breakfast of bread, cheese, and coffee before mounting up. As they rode out of town, Delilah couldn't help looking back at the auction block in the town square. A shiver ran through her at how differently things might have turned out. Are you all right? Preston asked, noticing her reaction. Yes, she said, turning resolutely forward. Just grateful to be leaving. They rode at a steady pace through the rugged landscape. The desert gave way to grasslands as they traveled, and Preston pointed out landmarks and told her about the area. He was knowledgeable about the land and its history, and Delilah found herself fascinated by his stories. How long have you had your ranch? She asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. 5 years, he replied. It was barely more than a shack and a few hundred acres when I bought it. Now it's up to 2,000 acres with a proper house and barn. That's impressive, she said sincerely. You must work very hard. A hint of a smile touched his lips. It's all I do, according to my brother. As the day wore on, Delilah grew more comfortable in the saddle, though her muscles protested the long ride. Preston seemed to notice her discomfort without her saying a word. We'll stop for the night soon, he said as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. There's a good spot by a creek not far ahead. The spot he chose was a small clearing near a bubbling creek, sheltered by cottonwood trees. Preston efficiently set up a camp, starting a fire and spreading bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames. It's not much, he apologized as he handed her a tin plate of beans and bacon he'd cooked over the fire. But it's hot. It's perfect, she assured him. Suddenly ravenous after the long day's ride, they ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and chirping crickets the only sounds. As night fell, the stars emerged in breathtaking profusion, more than Delilah had ever seen in the eastern skies. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. Preston followed her gaze. "That it is, one of the things I love most about this country." "How did you come to be here?" she asked. "You don't speak like you were born in the West." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. "I was born in Boston," he finally said. "My father was a shipbuilder. When he died, my mother remarried. Her new husband wasn't kind. I left home at 16, worked my way west. Tried my hand at mining, freight hauling, even law enforcement for a while." "And your brother," half-brother, Preston corrected. "My mother's child with her second husband. After she died 3 years ago, I went back east to get him. Couldn't leave him with that man." The simple statement spoke volumes about the kind of person Preston Hayes was. Delilah felt a warmth toward him that had nothing to do with the fire between them. "That was good of you," she said softly. He shrugged. "It was necessary." He stood and added more wood to the fire. "You should get some rest, Miss Morgan. We still have a long ride tomorrow." Delilah nodded and settled onto her bedroll, pulling the blanket up against the cooling night air. Across the fire, Preston sat with his back against a tree, his revolver within easy reach. "Aren't you going to sleep?" she asked. "Later," he said. "I'll keep watch for a while." She wanted to protest that he needed rest too, but the day's exertions caught up with her, and she was asleep within minutes. Delilah woke just before dawn to find Preston already up, coffee brewing over a fresh fire. He handed her a cup without a word, and she accepted it gratefully, the hot liquid warming her against the morning chill. They ate a quick breakfast and set off again as the sun began to rise. The landscape changed as they rode, becoming more varied with rolling hills and scattered stands of pine and oak. By midday, Preston pointed to a distant mesa. "The ranch lies just beyond that," he said. "We'll be there by late afternoon." As promised, they crested a rise in the late afternoon to reveal a valley below. A sturdy log house stood near a barn and corral with several outbuildings nearby. A creek ran through the property, and cattle grazed in the distance. "Welcome to the Double H," Preston said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a boy burst from the house and ran toward them, waving wildly. He was tall for 12, with the same blue eyes as Preston but darker hair. "Preston, you're back." He called, then stopped short when he saw Delilah. "Who's that?" "Daniel, this is Miss Morgan," Preston said as they dismounted. "She's going to be your teacher and help around the house." The boy eyed her suspiciously. "I don't need a teacher." "Daniel," Preston said warningly. "It's all right," Delilah said with a smile. "I understand, but perhaps we could just be friends for now and see about the teaching later." Daniel considered this, then nodded grudgingly. "I guess that would be all right." A weathered man in his 50s emerged from the barn. "Good to have you back, boss," he called. "Tom," Preston acknowledged. "Everything all right while I was gone, right as rain. Got that fence mended in the north pasture like you asked." Preston introduced Delilah to Tom Wilson, his foreman, who tipped his hat politely but couldn't quite hide his curiosity. It was clear that Preston bringing a woman to the ranch was unprecedented. The house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with a main room that served as both parlor and dining room, a kitchen, and 3 bedrooms. It was sparsely furnished but clean and well built. "This will be your room," Preston said, showing her to a small but pleasant bedroom with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small desk by the window. "It's not much, but it's lovely," Delilah interrupted sincerely. After what she'd been through, this modest room felt like a palace. Preston left her to settle in while he spoke with Tom about ranch matters. Delilah unpacked her few belongings and washed up, then went to explore the kitchen. It was well stocked, but showed signs of bachelor living mismatched dishes, a lack of proper cooking utensils, and an overall utilitarian approach to meals. She had just begun to inventory what she would need when Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Preston says you're from back east," he said without preamble. "That's right, I'm from Pennsylvania originally. Did you like it there?" It was home, she said simply, but I'm finding I like the West as well. Preston says the West is where a man can make his own way without anyone telling him what he can or can't be. Delilah smiled. Your brother is a wise man, Daniel shrugged. He works too hard. Tom says he's trying to build an empire for me, but I didn't ask for an empire. There was such an adult quality to the boy's observation that Delilah had to remind herself he was only 12. What would you like then? The question seemed to surprise him. He thought for a moment. I'd like to see more of the world before I decide what to do with my piece of it. A very reasonable approach, she approved. Perhaps we could start with books. I could teach you about different places and cultures. Interest sparked in his eyes before he remembered he was supposed to be resistant to the idea of lessons. Maybe, he said non-committally, if there's time. Delilah hid a smile. Of course, only if there's time. She found supplies to make a proper meal, a stew with the vegetables from the garden and beef from their own stock. By the time Preston returned from the barn, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of good food. Something smells wonderful, he said, washing his hands at the pump by the sink. Miss Morgan made stew, Daniel informed him, and corn bread. Preston looked at Delilah with surprise and gratitude. You didn't have to cook tonight, you must be tired from the journey. I wanted to, she said simply. It feels good to be useful. They ate at the rough-hewn table in the main room, and Delilah was pleased to see both brothers eat with enthusiasm. Preston complimented her cooking, and even Daniel admitted it was better than Preston's beans. After dinner, Daniel reluctantly helped with the dishes before Preston sent him to bed. Once they were alone, Preston poured 2 cups of coffee and joined Delilah by the fireplace. Thank you for dinner, he said. It's been a long time since we had a proper meal that wasn't beans or salt pork. You're welcome, I enjoy cooking. She sipped her coffee. Your brother is quite a character. Preston smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. That he is, too smart for his own good and too stubborn by half. He reminds me of someone, she teased gently. He chuckled. I suppose he does come by it honestly. His expression grew more serious. Miss Morgan, I want to make sure you're comfortable here. If there's anything you need or if the arrangements aren't suitable, everything is perfect, she assured him. And please call me Delilah. Delilah, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her pulse quicken. I want you to know that you're free to leave any time you wish. I'll pay you fair wages, and if you decide this isn't what you want, I'll help you get wherever you want to go. I appreciate that, she said softly. But for now, I'm exactly where I want to be. The look that passed between them lingered a moment longer than was proper, and Delilah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire before them. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Delilah took over the running of the household, bringing order and comfort to what had been a purely functional space. She started lessons with Daniel, who protested at first but soon became engaged when she tied the learning to practical applications around the ranch. Preston was often out from dawn till dusk, working with the cattle or making improvements to the property. When he returned in the evenings, he would listen with interest as Daniel excitedly shared what he'd learned that day, his eyes often straying to Delilah with a warmth that made her blush. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Delilah was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Expecting Preston, she was surprised to see a stranger riding up to the house, a well-dressed man on an expensive horse. "Hello there," he called, tipping his hat. "Is Preston Hayes about?" "He's out checking the herd," she replied cautiously. "May I tell him who's calling?" "James Thornton." The man dismounted smoothly. "And you must be the new housekeeper I've heard about." Something in his tone made Delilah uncomfortable. "Yes, I'm Miss Morgan, Mr. Hayes should be back soon if you'd like to wait." Thornton approached, studying her with unconcealed interest. "I think I will, thank you." He glanced around the yard. "Preston's done well for himself here, better than many expected." Delilah led him to the porch, offering him water but nothing more familiar. She was relieved when she heard more hoofbeats and saw Preston riding in. His expression tightened when he saw the visitor. "Thornton," he said, dismounting, "what brings you out this way?" "Business, Hayes." "Always business." Thornton stood. I've come to renew my offer for your water rights, Preston's jaw set, and my answer is the same as before. The creek isn't for sale, Thornton sighed dramatically. I was afraid you'd say that, but I've brought a new offer double what I proposed last time. The answer is still no. The men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Delilah quietly excused herself to finish the laundry but stayed within earshot. You're making a mistake, Hayes, Thornton said, his friendly demeanor slipping. That creek is the only thing making this worthless land valuable, and I need it for my mining operation. Your mining operation can find another water source, Preston replied evenly. This creek feeds my entire valley. Be reasonable, man. You can't fight progress. The territory is changing. Cattle ranching is the past, mining is the future. Not on my land, Thornton's voice hardened. I always get what I want, Hayes, one way or another. Is that a threat? A statement of fact. Think about my offer, I won't be making another. Thornton mounted his horse. Oh, and give my regards to your lovely housekeeper. She's quite a find. Preston's hand moved to his gun, but he kept it holstered. Goodbye, Thornton. After the man rode away, Preston remained on the porch, his expression thunderous. Delilah approached cautiously. Who was that man? She asked. James Thornton. Owns the copper mine near Copper Creek and half the businesses in town, including the saloon. Preston's voice was tight with anger. He's been trying to buy my water rights for 2 years. Why does he want them so badly? Mining uses a lot of water, and the creek that runs through our property is the most reliable source for miles. Preston ran a hand through his hair. If he diverts it for his operation, it would dry up the valley. Everything I've built here would be worthless. He seemed determined. Preston's eyes met hers, concern evident. Thornton is used to getting his way, and he doesn't fight fair. He hesitated. Delilah, if you'd rather not stay, given the situation, I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. The look of relief on his face warmed her heart. Thank you, he said simply. That night, after Daniel was asleep, Preston showed Delilah a locked chest he kept in his room. Inside were papers, deeds, water rights, and maps of the property. If anything happens to me, he said quietly, these papers prove ownership of the ranch and the water rights. They would go to Daniel with you as his guardian until he's of age, if you're willing. Delilah was stunned. Preston, nothing's going to happen to you? Probably not, he agreed. But Thornton is a dangerous man, and I want to be prepared. He hesitated. There's money too enough to get you and Daniel to safety if necessary. Why are you telling me this? Because I trust you, he said simply. More than anyone except Tom, and he's getting too old for this kind of fight. Delilah felt the weight of his trust settle on her shoulders. I won't let you down, she promised. Preston's hand covered hers, warm and strong. I know. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. For an instant, Delilah thought he might kiss her, and she realized with sudden clarity that she wanted him to. But Preston gently released her hand and stepped back. Good night, Delilah, he said softly. Good night, Preston. The next few days passed uneventfully, but there was a new awareness between them, a tension that hadn't been there before. Delilah found herself watching Preston when he didn't notice the way he moved with quiet strength, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness he showed with Daniel despite his gruff exterior. She was falling in love with him. She realized one afternoon as she watched him through the kitchen window, teaching Daniel how to repair a saddle. The realization didn't shock her as much as she expected. Perhaps because, deep down, she'd been falling for him since that moment on the auction block when he'd cut her bonds and told her she was free. What she couldn't be sure of was whether he felt the same. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, but he always maintained a careful distance between them. A week after Thornton's visit, Preston announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into town for supplies. Can I come? Daniel asked eagerly. Preston shook his head. Not this time. I need you here to help Tom with the new calves. Daniel's face fell, but he didn't argue. Yes, sir. I was hoping you might accompany me, Delilah, Preston said, surprising her. There are household supplies we need, and you'd know better than I what to get. I'd like that, she said, trying to hide her pleasure at the prospect of spending the day with him. They set out after breakfast, riding side by side. The journey to town would take most of the day, so Preston had arranged for them to stay overnight at the hotel and return the following morning. "Is it safe to leave Daniel?" Delilah asked as they rode. "Tom will look after him, and there are 2 other hands staying at the bunkhouse," Preston assured her. "Besides, I don't think Thornton would move against the ranch itself, too obvious." They rode mostly in companionable silence, occasionally commenting on the landscape or sharing stories. Delilah told him about her life in Pennsylvania, her parents' death, and her decision to seek a teaching position out west. Preston spoke more of his past as well, his difficult childhood, his travels across the country, and his dream of building something lasting for his brother. By the time they reached town, a larger settlement than Copper Creek, with a proper main street lined with businesses, Delilah felt closer to Preston than ever before. The general store was their first stop. While Preston arranged for larger supplies to be delivered to the ranch, Delilah selected household necessities. The storekeeper's wife helped her choose fabric for new curtains and offered advice on preserving the garden's bounty for winter. "You must be the woman staying at the Hayes Ranch," the woman said as she wrapped Delilah's purchases. "We've heard about you." "Have you?" Delilah asked, surprised. "News travels fast out here, dear, and Preston Hayes suddenly having a woman at his ranch is definitely news." The woman smiled kindly. "He's a good man. Reserved but respected." "Yes, he is," Delilah agreed, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. After completing their shopping, Preston took her to the town's small restaurant for dinner. It was a simple place, but the food was good, and Delilah enjoyed the novelty of a meal she hadn't cooked herself. "Thank you for today," she said as they finished their meal. "It's been lovely to get away from the ranch, even briefly." "I should be thanking you," Preston replied. "The ranch has been different since you arrived. Better." He hesitated. "Daniel is happier, I'm happier." The simple admission made Delilah's heart race. "I'm glad," she said softly. "I'm happier too." Their eyes met across the table, and this time neither looked away. The connection between them was palpable, electric. The moment was broken by the restaurant door opening loudly. James Thornton walked in, accompanied by 2 rough-looking men. He spotted Preston immediately and smiled coldly. "Well, if it isn't Preston Hayes," he called, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And his lovely housekeeper. How domestic." Preston's face hardened, but he kept his voice even. "Thornton, have you reconsidered my generous offer?" Thornton approached their table uninvited. "No, pity." Thornton's gaze shifted to Delilah, undressing her with his eyes. "Perhaps the lady could persuade you to be more reasonable." Preston stood slowly. "Miss Morgan has nothing to do with this. I suggest you leave her out of it." "Touch a nerve, did I?" Thornton smirked. "Interesting. I didn't realize your arrangement was so personal." Delilah saw Preston's hand move toward his gun and quickly stood as well. "We were just leaving," she said firmly. "Good evening, Mr. Thornton." She placed her hand on Preston's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. After a moment, he nodded curtly and placed coins on the table for their meal. "This isn't over, Hayes," Thornton called as they left. Outside, Preston was vibrating with anger. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," he said as they walked toward the hotel. "It's not your fault," she assured him. "He's clearly a bully, a dangerous one." Preston ran a hand through his hair. "Delilah, I'm beginning to think bringing you to town was a mistake. Thornton now sees you as a way to get to me." "I can handle James Thornton," she said confidently, though her heart was racing. "And I won't let him intimidate us." Preston looked down at her, his expression softening. "You're a remarkable woman, Delilah Morgan." At the hotel, Preston checked them into separate rooms, ensuring hers was as far from his as possible to avoid any impropriety. As they stood in the hallway outside her door, an awkward moment ensued. "Thank you for today," she said again. "Despite Mr. Thornton's interruption, I enjoyed myself immensely, as did I." Preston seemed to be struggling with something he wanted to say. Finally, he simply said, "Good night, Delilah. I'll meet you for breakfast at 7. "Good night, Preston." Inside her room, Delilah changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair, her mind full of the day's events, particularly the moments of connection with Preston. She was just about to blow out the lamp when a soft knock came at her door. Cautiously, she approached. "Who is it?" "It's me." Preston's voice came through the door. She opened it a crack, conscious of her state of undress. Preston stood in the hallway, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, "but there's something I need to say, and if I don't say it now, I might lose my nerve." "What is it?" she asked, her heart pounding. He took a deep breath. "Delilah, I care for you, more than I should, perhaps, given our arrangement. But I can't keep pretending these feelings don't exist." He looked at her intently. "I understand if you don't feel the same way or if you're not ready. I just needed you to know." Delilah's breath caught in her throat. "Preston, a crash from downstairs interrupted her, followed by shouting and the sound of breaking glass. Preston's head whipped toward the noise, his hand going to his gun. "Stay here," he ordered. "Lock the door." Before she could protest, he was moving down the hallway toward the stairs. Delilah closed the door as instructed but couldn't bring herself to lock it. Instead, she quickly pulled on her dress over her nightgown and followed him. The hotel lobby was in chaos. A fist fight had broken out between several men, furniture was overturned, and the night clerk was cowering behind the desk. Preston stood at the bottom of the stairs, assessing the situation. One of the fighters looked up and spotted him. With a shout, he broke away from the others and charged straight at Preston. "Hayes, this is for Thornton." Preston barely had time to react before the man was on him. They grappled briefly before Preston gained the upper hand, landing a solid punch that sent the attacker stumbling backward. But as Preston turned to face the next threat, Delilah saw a flash of metal. One of the other men had drawn a knife. "Preston, behind you," she cried. He spun just in time to dodge the blade, but in the process, he lost his footing on the stairs. Delilah watched in horror as he tumbled backward, striking his head on the banister with a sickening crack before landing in a crumpled heap at the bottom of the staircase. The fight seemed to freeze for a moment as everyone stared at Preston's motionless form. Then the man with the knife cursed and ran for the door, his companions following close behind. Delilah raced down the stairs, heedless of her own safety, and dropped to her knees beside Preston. Blood trickled from a gash on his temple, but to her immense relief, he was breathing. "Someone get the doctor," she shouted, and the night clerk scrambled to obey. Preston groaned, his eyelids fluttering. "Delilah, I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "Don't move, you've hit your head." "Thornton," he muttered. "It was Thornton's men, I know, they're gone now." The doctor arrived quickly, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and efficient hands. He examined Preston carefully, cleaning and bandaging the head wound. "You're lucky, Mr. Hayes," he said as he worked. "A few inches to the right and we might be having a different conversation. As it is, you've got a nasty concussion, but nothing appears to be broken." "Can he be moved?" Delilah asked. "Preferably not tonight," the doctor replied. "He should rest here until morning at least. I'll check on him again then." With the help of the hotel staff, they managed to get Preston to his room and into bed. The doctor left medicine for pain and instructions for Delilah to wake Preston every few hours to ensure he remained coherent. Once they were alone, Delilah pulled a chair to his bedside and took his hand again. "You scared me half to death," she admonished gently. Preston's eyes were clearer now, though still pained. "I'm sorry, I told you Thornton fights dirty. This is more than fighting dirty, this is attempted murder. He'll deny any involvement." Preston winced as he tried to sit up, then thought better of it. "It will be his word against mine, and in this territory his word carries more weight with the law." Delilah squeezed his hand. "We should leave first thing in the morning, get back to the ranch where it's safer." Preston nodded slightly, then grimaced at the movement. "Daniel," he murmured. "We need to get back to Daniel." "We will," she promised. "Now rest." She stayed by his side through the night, waking him as instructed and offering water and medicine when needed. By morning his color was better, and the doctor pronounced him well enough to travel, though he advised taking it slowly. They left town as soon as possible, Preston riding despite Delilah's concerns. He was pale and clearly in pain, but determined to reach the ranch before nightfall. "I don't trust Thornton not to try something at the ranch while we're away," he explained, "especially after last night's failure." They rode more slowly than their journey to town, stopping frequently for Preston to rest. Delilah watched him with concern, noting how he swayed slightly in the saddle despite his efforts to appear steady. "Preston," she said during one of their stops, "about what you said last night before the fight, we don't have to talk about that now," he interrupted, his eyes not meeting hers. "I understand if you want to forget it." "No," she said firmly. "I don't want to forget it. I want you to know that I feel the same way." His head came up sharply, then he winced at the sudden movement. "You do?" "Yes," she said simply. "I have for some time." The smile that spread across his face was worth all the worry of the night before. He reached for her hand, drawing her closer. "Delilah Morgan, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met." This time, when he leaned toward her, there was no interruption. His lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as she responded. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, her heart soaring. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Preston rested his forehead against hers, mindful of his injury. "I've wanted to do that since the day I met you," he admitted. "Even when I was on that auction block, tear-stained and disheveled," she teased. "Especially then," he said seriously. "Your courage in the face of such indignity. I knew then you were someone special." They continued their journey with a new understanding between them, their hands occasionally reaching for each other as they rode side by side. As they crested the final rise overlooking the ranch, however, Preston's expression changed to one of alarm. "Something's wrong," he said, spurring his horse forward. Delilah followed his gaze and saw what had alarmed him. Smoke was rising from near the barn, too much smoke for a normal cooking fire. They galloped down the slope, Preston ignoring the pain of his injury in his haste to reach the ranch. As they drew closer, they could see flames engulfing the barn, with several figures working desperately to contain the fire. "Daniel," Preston shouted as he dismounted, nearly falling in his haste. Tom emerged from the smoke, his face blackened. "Preston, thank God you're back." "Where's Daniel?" Preston demanded, gripping the older man's shoulders. "He's safe," Tom assured him. "He's with Jeb by the creek, keeping the horses calm. The fire started about an hour ago. We've been trying to keep it from spreading to the house." Relief flooded Preston's face, quickly replaced by determination. "What happened? Don't know for sure," Tom said grimly, "but I found this." He held up an empty whiskey bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck, a crude firebomb. Someone threw it through the barn window. If Daniel hadn't been out there exercising the horses. Preston's jaw clenched. Thornton. They joined the effort to fight the fire, forming a bucket brigade from the creek. Despite their best efforts, the barn was a total loss, but they managed to save the house and other outbuildings. Daniel ran to Preston as soon as the danger had passed, throwing his arms around his brother with uncharacteristic emotion. "I tried to save it," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears, "but it went up so fast." Preston hugged him tightly. "You did the right thing getting the horses out. Buildings can be replaced, you can't." That night, after Daniel was finally asleep, Preston and Delilah sat at the kitchen table discussing their options. Tom joined them, his weathered face grave. "This can't continue," Preston said, his voice low with anger. "Thornton's escalating. First the attack at the hotel, now this. What's next?" "We could go to the territorial marshal," Delilah suggested. "Surely attempted murder and arson would be enough to arrest him." Tom shook his head. "Not without proof, and Thornton's too smart to leave any. Those men at the hotel won't talk, and there were no witnesses to the barn burning." "So what do we do?" Delilah asked. "We can't just wait for his next attack." Preston was silent for a long moment. "We fight back," he finally said, "not with violence, but with the law. Thornton wants the water rights. Well, he can't have them if they're legally protected." "How do we do that?" Tom asked. "There's a new territorial law that allows for the protection of water sources for established ranches. I've been gathering the documentation to file for it." Preston looked at Delilah. "That's partly why I wanted to go to town. I needed to speak with a lawyer there about finalizing the paperwork." "Did you manage to do that before everything happened?" she asked. Preston nodded. "Yes, the lawyer is preparing the final documents." Once they're filed with the Territorial Land Office, Thornton won't be able to touch our water rights, even if he buys all the surrounding land. He won't take that lying down, Tom warned. No, Preston agreed grimly, which is why I need you both to be extra vigilant, and Delilah. He hesitated. It might be safer for you to take Daniel and go to town until this is resolved. Absolutely not, she said firmly. My place is here with you, and Daniel would never agree to leave the ranch. Preston looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Then we'll all need to be careful. No one rides alone, and we keep weapons close at hand. The next few days were tense. They began rebuilding the barn, all of them working from dawn till dusk. Preston's head injury improved gradually, though Delilah noticed he still suffered from headaches. 4 days after the fire, a rider approached the ranch, the lawyer from town, clutching a leather satchel. "Mr. Hayes," he called as he dismounted. "I've brought the finalized documents for your water rights protection. They just need your signature, and then I'll file them with the land office in the territorial capital." Relief washed over Preston's face as he invited the man inside. The documents were complex, but the lawyer explained each one carefully as Preston signed them. "Once these are filed, your water rights will be protected by territorial law," the lawyer explained. "Mr. Thornton or anyone else would need to prove in court that their need supersedes yours, which would be nearly impossible given your established ranch operations." "How long will filing take?" Preston asked. "I leave for the capital tomorrow. The filing itself should only take a day or two, then another day for my return journey. You should have confirmation by the end of next week." After the lawyer left, Preston seemed to breathe easier for the first time in days. "Once those papers are filed, Thornton loses his main leverage," he told Delilah that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "He can still make trouble, but he can't get what he really wants." "Do you think he'll give up?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. Preston's arm came around her. "Eventually, men like Thornton move on to easier targets when they're thwarted long enough." She turned her face up to his. "Then we've won." "Not yet," he cautioned. "The next week will be the most dangerous. Thornton's sure to have spies in town who will tell him about the lawyer's journey. If he's desperate enough, he might try to intercept those papers." The lawyer seemed capable, and he said he was taking an armed escort. "I hope that's enough." Preston kissed her gently. "But I won't feel safe until those papers are filed and we have confirmation." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, the sheriff from Copper Creek, the same man who had put Delilah on the auction block. He rode up to the house alone, his manner unusually subdued. Preston met him in the yard, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "Sheriff Blackwood, what brings you to my property?" The sheriff removed his hat. "Mr. Hayes, I've come on official business." His eyes flickered to Delilah, who had come to stand on the porch. "Madam, what official business?" Preston asked coldly. "I have a warrant for your arrest," the sheriff said, producing a paper from his vest pocket. "For the murder of James Thornton," Delilah gasped. Preston's face went blank with shock. "Murder? Thornton's dead, shot dead in his office last night," the sheriff confirmed. "And witnesses place you in town around that time, having a heated argument with him earlier in the day." "That's impossible," Preston said firmly. "I haven't left this ranch in 4 days. Ask any of my men." "Your men would lie for you," the sheriff said dismissively. "The witnesses are respected businessmen in town. Paid by Thornton, no doubt," Preston spat. "Or should I say, by whoever has taken over Thornton's interests now that he's dead. That's for a judge to decide." The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. "Are you coming peacefully, or do we have to do this the hard way?" Delilah stepped forward. "This is absurd. Preston was here all night. I can vouch for that." The sheriff's gaze turned calculating. "Can you now, and what exactly is your relationship with Mr. Hayes that you can account for his whereabouts at night, Miss Morgan?" Preston moved slightly, placing himself between Delilah and the sheriff. "Leave her out of this, Blackwood. You know this is a frame-up. Like I said, that's for a judge to decide." The sheriff pulled out handcuffs. "Now turn around and put your hands behind your back." For a tense moment, Delilah thought Preston might resist. His body was coiled tight, ready for action. But then Daniel emerged from the house, and Preston's resolve visibly changed. "All right," he said quietly. "But I want your word that my family won't be harassed while I'm gone." The sheriff nodded. "You have it." As the sheriff cuffed him, Preston looked at Delilah. "Get word to Mr. Reynolds, the lawyer in town. Tell him what's happened." And Delilah, his voice dropped. "Remember what I showed you?" "Just in case," she nodded, fighting back tears. "I'll take care of everything, and Preston will prove your innocence." The sheriff led Preston to his horse, helping him mount awkwardly with his hands bound. As they rode away, Daniel came to stand beside Delilah, his young face set in determination. "He didn't do it," the boy said firmly. "I know," Delilah agreed, "and we're going to prove it." Tom joined them, watching the sheriff and Preston disappear over the rise. "This stinks of Thornton's partners," he said grimly. "They're trying to get the ranch while the water rights protection is still pending. Then we need to make sure those papers get filed," Delilah said with sudden resolve. "Tom, can you ride to town and find Mr. Reynolds? Tell him what's happened and make sure he still plans to take those papers to the Capitol." "What about you and the boy?" Tom asked. "We'll be fine. Jeb and the others will keep watch." She squeezed Daniel's shoulder. "And we're going to find out who really killed James Thornton." After Tom left, Delilah and Daniel went to Preston's room. She unlocked the chest he had shown her, finding the money and papers he had mentioned. "What are we looking for?" Daniel asked as she sorted through the documents. "Anything that might help us understand who would want to frame your brother." She paused, finding a stack of letters. "These are from someone named Samuel Grant. Do you know who that is?" Daniel shook his head. "Never heard of him." Delilah read through the letters quickly. "He was Thornton's business partner, it seems. They had a falling out over the mining operation." She looked up at Daniel, excitement in her eyes. "These letters suggest Grant wanted the water rights as much as Thornton did, but Thornton wouldn't let him pursue them independently." "So if Thornton was dead," Daniel began, "Grant could make his own play for the water," Delilah finished. "We need to find out more about this Samuel Grant." They spent the rest of the day going through Preston's papers, finding more references to Grant and his increasingly hostile relationship with Thornton. By evening, Delilah had formulated a plan. "We need to go to town," she told Daniel as they ate dinner. "Tomorrow morning, early." "Preston said we should stay here," the boy objected. "And normally I would agree, but Preston's freedom depends on us finding the truth, and I think the truth is in town, not here at the ranch." Daniel considered this. "All right, but I'm bringing my rifle." They set out at dawn, leaving Jeb in charge of the ranch. The ride to town was tense, both of them watchful for any sign of trouble. When they arrived, the town was buzzing with news of Thornton's murder and Preston's arrest. Their first stop was the jail, where Delilah insisted on seeing Preston despite the deputy's objections. Finally, he relented and led her to the cells at the back of the building. Preston was in the last cell, sitting on a narrow cot. He stood when he saw her coming to the bars. "Delilah." "You shouldn't be here." "Of course I should," she said firmly. "How are they treating you?" "Well enough." His voice lowered. "Did you find Tom? Has he reached Reynolds?" "Yes, Tom is making sure the papers get to the Capitol." She glanced at the deputy, who was keeping a respectful distance but still within earshot. "Preston, have you ever heard of Samuel Grant?" A flash of recognition crossed his face. "Thornton's former partner. They had a falling out last year. We found letters in your chest," she whispered. "I think Grant might be behind this. The timing is too convenient. Thornton dies just as you're about to secure the water rights legally." Preston gripped the bars. "That makes sense. Grant always wanted the water more than Thornton did. He had plans for a larger mining operation that would need even more water than the current one." "Do you know where I might find him?" Delilah, "No," Preston said urgently. "It's too dangerous. Grant is as ruthless as Thornton, maybe more so." "I'm not going to confront him," she assured him. "But if we can find evidence that he was involved in Thornton's death." Preston hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "He has an office above the bank, but promise me you'll be careful and keep Daniel away from there." "I promise." She reached through the bars to touch his face. "We're going to get you out of here." "I know," he said softly. "I trust you, Delilah." After leaving the jail, Delilah and Daniel made their way to the hotel where they took a room. Daniel wanted to go with her to Grant's office, but she insisted he stay at the hotel. "I need you to be my backup," she told him. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, go to the lawyer's office and tell him everything we've discovered." The boy reluctantly agreed, and Delilah made her way to the bank. The building was one of the most imposing in town, a 2-story brick structure with a sign indicating that offices could be found on the upper floor. At the top of the stairs, she found a door labeled S. Grant and Associates Mining Investments. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. A clerk answered, eyeing her curiously. "May I help you, miss?" "I'd like to see Mr. Grant, please. It's regarding the Hayes Ranch water rights." The clerk hesitated. "Mr. Grant is quite busy with Mr. Thornton's funeral arrangements, but I'll see if he can spare a moment." He disappeared into an inner office, returning moments later. "Mr. Grant will see you." Samuel Grant was not what Delilah had expected. Instead of the rough-looking businessman she had imagined, he was a slender, refined man with spectacles and meticulously groomed gray hair. He rose politely as she entered his office. "Miss Morgan, Delilah Morgan." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Ah, the school teacher from the Hayes Ranch. Please have a seat. My clerk mentioned something about water rights." Delilah sat, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes. As you may know, Mr. Hayes has been arrested for Mr. Thornton's murder." "A terrible business," Grant said, shaking his head. "I've known James for years. His death is a great loss to the community." "Indeed," Delilah agreed. "The timing is especially unfortunate, given that Mr. Hayes was about to secure legal protection for his water rights." Grant's eyebrows rose slightly. "Was he? I wasn't aware of that." "Yes. The papers are on their way to the territorial capital as we speak." This was a calculated risk. If Grant was indeed behind the frame-up, this information might provoke a reaction. She wasn't disappointed. A flash of alarm crossed Grant's face before he controlled his expression. "I see. That's interesting timing, isn't it?" Delilah leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Grant, I know about your interest in the water rights, and I know about your falling out with Mr. Thornton over the expansion of the mining operation." Grant's face hardened. "You seem remarkably well informed for a schoolteacher, Miss Morgan." "I'm more than a schoolteacher, Mr. Grant. I'm Preston Hayes' fiancé." The lie came easily, and Grant didn't challenge it. Instead, he steepled his fingers, studying her. "And what exactly are you hoping to accomplish with this visit, Miss Morgan?" "Justice," she said simply. "Preston didn't kill Mr. Thornton. But someone did, someone who stood to benefit from his death and who wanted to prevent Preston from securing those water rights." "And you think that someone is me?" Grant's voice was dangerously soft. "I think you had motive," Delilah replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The question is whether you had opportunity." Grant stood abruptly. "This conversation is over, Miss Morgan. I suggest you leave before I call the sheriff and have you arrested for slander." Delilah rose calmly. "Of course. Thank you for your time, Mr. Grant." As she turned to leave, she noticed a leather-bound ledger on a side table, open to a page of entries. One entry caught her eye, a payment to Sheriff Blackwood dated the day before Thornton's murder. Grant followed her gaze and quickly moved to close the ledger, but not before Delilah had committed the entry to memory. She left the office with her heart pounding, knowing she had just found a crucial piece of evidence. Back at the hotel, she recounted the meeting to Daniel. "The sheriff is involved," she concluded. "That payment in Grant's ledger is proof that they were working together." "But how do we prove it?" Daniel asked. "It's our word against theirs." Delilah thought for a moment. "We need to get into Grant's office when he's not there." "If we could get that ledger." "Breaking and entering," Daniel looked scandalized, then thoughtful. "Actually, I might know a way in. The bank has a back entrance that the clerks use. Preston showed it to me once when we came to town." That night, while the town slept, Delilah and Daniel slipped through the back entrance of the bank and made their way upstairs to Grant's office. The lock on his door was simple, and Daniel proved surprisingly adept at picking it. "Where did you learn to do that?" Delilah whispered as the door swung open. "Preston taught me," the boy admitted. "He said it might come in handy someday." They found the ledger where Delilah had seen it earlier. The entry was clear a payment of $500 to Sheriff Blackwood for special services. There were other suspicious entries as well, including payments to two men Delilah recognized as the witnesses who had supposedly seen Preston in town the night of the murder. "This is it," she whispered triumphantly. "This proves the sheriff was working with Grant." They carefully tore out the relevant pages, replaced the ledger, and slipped out of the office. As they made their way back to the hotel, Delilah's mind was racing with plans. They needed to get this evidence to someone who could act on it, someone outside the local law enforcement, which was clearly corrupted by Grant's influence. The answer came to her as they reached the hotel. The territorial marshal, the highest law enforcement officer in the territory, was scheduled to arrive the next day for Thornton's funeral. If they could present the evidence to him directly, bypassing the local sheriff. The next morning, Delilah dressed in her best clothes and instructed Daniel to stay in the hotel room. "If anything goes wrong, take the evidence to Mr. Reynolds when he returns," she told the boy. "But I want to come with you," Daniel protested. "I know, but this is something I need to do alone." She hugged him tightly. "I promise I'll be careful." The funeral was held at the town's small church, attended by most of the community. Delilah slipped in quietly, staying at the back. She spotted Grant sitting in the front pew, his head bowed in apparent grief. Sheriff Blackwood stood near the door, his expression appropriately solemn. After the service, the mourners filed out to the cemetery for the burial. Delilah followed at a distance, watching for her opportunity. The territorial marshal was easy to spot, a tall, imposing man with a silver star on his chest, standing somewhat apart from the locals. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Delilah made her way through the crowd until she stood beside the marshal. "Sir," she whispered, "I need to speak with you urgently. It's about James Thornton's murder." The marshal glanced at her, his expression guarded. "And you are Delilah Morgan. I have evidence that Preston Hayes is innocent and that Samuel Grant and Sheriff Blackwood conspired to frame him." Interest flickered in the marshal's eyes. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Morgan." "I have proof," she said, patting her reticule where the ledger pages were hidden. "But not here, there are too many eyes." The marshal nodded slightly. "Meet me at the hotel in 1 hour." Delilah slipped away from the cemetery, unaware that her exchange with the marshal had been noticed by one of Grant's men, who immediately went to inform his employer. She had just reached the hotel when she was intercepted by Sheriff Blackwood and 2 deputies. "Miss Morgan," the sheriff said coldly, "you're under arrest for breaking and entering and theft of private property." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to remain calm. "Mr. Grant's office was broken into last night. Items were stolen." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "And you were seen talking to the territorial marshal at the funeral. What did you tell him?" "Nothing that concerns you," she replied, backing away slowly. One of the deputies grabbed her arm. "You're coming with us, miss." "Let her go." The command came from Daniel, who had emerged from the hotel, Preston's rifle in his hands. Despite his youth, there was nothing childish about the way he held the weapon or the determination in his eyes. "This doesn't concern you, boy," the sheriff said dismissively. "Go back inside." "It concerns me plenty," Daniel replied. "That's my family you're manhandling." The standoff might have ended badly if not for the timely arrival of the territorial marshal, accompanied by Tom and several armed men. "What's going on here, Blackwood?" the marshal demanded. The sheriff released Delilah's arm. "Just doing my job, Marshal. This woman is suspected of burglary." "Is that so?" The marshal's gaze moved to Delilah. "I believe Miss Morgan has some information relevant to a murder investigation." "I'd like to hear what she has to say before you take her anywhere." Blackwood's face reddened. "Now see here, Marshal, this is my jurisdiction, and I outrank you," the marshal interrupted coldly. "Stand down, Blackwood." In the marshal's office, temporarily commandeered from the sheriff, Delilah presented the evidence from Grant's ledger. The marshal examined the pages carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each entry. "This is compelling," he admitted. "Payments to the sheriff, to the supposed witnesses. But it's not quite enough to prove Grant killed Thornton or framed Hayes." "What about this?" Tom spoke up, producing a telegram. "Just arrived for Mr. Reynolds. The water rights protection has been filed and approved. Hayes now legally owns the water rights in perpetuity." The marshal's eyebrows rose. That gives Grant even more motive to want Hayes out of the way. "And there's this," Daniel added, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket. "I found it in Grant's trash when we were in his office. It's a deed of sale for the Hayes Ranch, already filled out but not signed." The marshal took the document, studying it. "This is dated tomorrow," he said slowly. "Grant was planning to take over the ranch before the water rights could be legally secured. With Preston in jail for murder, the ranch would be vulnerable," Delilah explained. "Grant could pressure Daniel as the only remaining family to sell." "Over my dead body," the boy muttered. The marshal nodded. "I've seen enough. I'm releasing Preston Hayes and arresting Samuel Grant and Sheriff Blackwood pending a full investigation." Preston's release from jail was a moment of pure joy. He emerged from the cell block looking tired but relieved, his face lighting up when he saw Delilah and Daniel waiting for him. He embraced his brother tightly, then turned to Delilah. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, heedless of the onlookers. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I hear I have you to thank for my freedom," he said softly. "We all worked together," she replied, gesturing to Daniel and Tom. "But yes, I may have broken into Grant's office and stolen incriminating evidence." Preston laughed, a rich, genuine sound that Delilah realized she'd rarely heard from him before. "You are a remarkable woman, Delilah Morgan." "So you've said before," she teased. His expression grew serious. "I meant it then, and I mean it now." He took her hands in his. "When I was in that cell, thinking I might hang for a murder I didn't commit, my only regret was that I hadn't told you sooner how much I love you." Delilah's heart soared. "Preston, let me finish," he said gently. "I love you, Delilah. I think I've loved you since the moment I cut those ropes from your wrists and saw the strength in your eyes, even through your tears. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." "Are you proposing, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I believe I am, Miss Morgan," he replied with a smile, "though I had planned something more romantic than a jailhouse release." "This is perfect," she assured him, tears of happiness in her eyes. "And yes, Preston Hayes, I will marry you. I love you too." Their lips met again in a tender kiss, sealing their promise to each other. Daniel cleared his throat loudly. "Does this mean Delilah's staying for good?" The boy asked, trying to sound casual though his excitement was evident. Preston put an arm around his brother's shoulders. "If that's all right with you." Daniel pretended to consider this. "Well, she is a pretty good teacher, and her cooking's better than yours. I guess she can stay." They all laughed, the tension of the past days finally breaking. As they left the jail, the marshal approached them. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "Grant and Blackwood are in custody. We found a witness who saw Grant leaving Thornton's office around the time of the murder. With the financial evidence and the premeditated deed, I believe we have enough to convict them both." "Thank you, Marshal," Preston said sincerely, "for listening when others wouldn't." "Thank your fiancée," the marshal replied with a hint of a smile. "She's quite persistent." As they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, Delilah felt a profound sense of peace. The valley spread before them, green and vibrant, the creek glittering in the sunlight. This would be her home now, their home. A place built on courage, perseverance, and love. Preston reached over to take her hand as they rode side by side. "Are you happy?" he asked. Delilah looked at him, this man who had cut her bonds and told her no one owned her, who had given her freedom and then won her heart. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied. 6 months later, they were married under the cottonwood trees by the creek, with Daniel standing proudly as Preston's best man. The ranch was flourishing, the new barn larger and sturdier than the old one. Delilah had turned the small bedroom into a proper schoolroom, where she taught not only Daniel, but also the children of the ranch hands who had settled nearby with their families. Grant and Blackwood had been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms for murder and corruption. Thornton's mining operation had been sold to investors who were content to work with the water they had access to, without threatening the Hayes Ranch. On their wedding night, As they stood on the porch of their home watching the stars come out, Preston pulled Delilah close. "Do you remember what I said to you that day on the auction block?" he asked. "No one owns you now," she quoted softly. He nodded. "I meant it then as an affirmation of your freedom, but now I understand it differently." "How so?" "No one owns you because we belong to each other, freely given, freely received." He kissed her gently. "I belong to you, Delilah Hayes, heart and soul, and I to you," she whispered against his lips. As they stepped into their home, their future together, Delilah thought of the journey that had brought her here. From the tearful woman on the auction block to the beloved wife of a good man, she had found not just freedom but a love deeper and truer than she had ever dared to dream possible. And in the years that followed, as their family grew with the birth of their children and the ranch prospered under their care, Delilah and Preston often recalled that pivotal moment when he had cut her bonds and spoken those words that had changed both their lives forever. "No one owns you now." For in finding each other, they had found something far more precious than ownership. They had found belonging, purpose, and a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives together in the wild, beautiful West.